Welcome, welcome, all you cubs, back to the lion's den. We've got a new episode of Bad Science Communication here. This one was posted a couple weeks ago in The Conversation, which I believe is out of Australia, if I'm not mistaken. Obviously, they've got offices all around the world. This one's an interesting one, and this is actually an issue. I don't know if issue is really the right word to use, but it's a talking point I hear from a lot of people, the idea that time isn't real, time doesn't actually exist, or time is just an illusion. And I'm not going to dive too deeply into that concept in this video, but we are going to analyze this article and some of the things that it says. It's entitled, "Time Might Not Exist According to Physicists and Philosophers, but That's Okay." So obviously the title is going to be it's going to be clickbaity. I mean, this isn't actually like a scientific website. The Conversation is kind of just a general website about things, kind of like a New York Times or something like that. They don't, or more like a Time magazine or something like that. They don't focus specifically on science. Actually, you know what? Just out of curiosity, I'd like to take just a quick look at the author here. Associate Professor at the Australian Catholic University. His research focuses on the connection between key topics in the philosophy of math and mathematical ontology, philosophy of time concerning temporal ontology. Ooh, that sounds pretty interesting, actually. Central focus of this research is the role of truth-making and non-causal explanation in arguments both for and against particular... That actually sounds really... I might have to contact this guy. I think I could enjoy a conversation with him. Anyway, let's take a look at the article that he wrote. Because I just want to say right off the bat, I don't know really any competent physicist who would say that time doesn't exist, at least in the sense of being physically real, at least at some scale of reality. And I think that most philosophers, particularly philosophers of physics, and philosophers of relativity, as well as philosophers of time, would probably also say that time is a physically real thing. So let's jump in here. Does time exist? The answer to this question may seem obvious. Of course it does. Just look at a calendar or a clock. But developments in physics suggest the non-existence of time is an open possibility, and one that we should take seriously. I'm assuming that later in this article, because as you know, I don't generally read these beforehand, because you know how I am with raw responses to things that I'm watching or reading. But I'm assuming they're going to outline some developments, but as far as I know, there aren't any developments in physics that would suggest that time is... And I should clarify, for the sake of this video at least, in reviewing this article, I'm going to be taking non-existence of time or references to time might not exist or time isn't real to mean that time is not a physically real thing, as, well, physics suggests quite clearly that it is. So with respect to time being physically real, I don't personally know of any developments in physics that are suggesting that that's not the case. How can that be, and what would it mean? It'll take a little while to explain, but don't worry, even if time doesn't exist, our lives will go on as usual. That seems a very interesting statement to make. A crisis in physics. Physics is in crisis. Well, it depends what you mean by that, I guess. Physics certainly has issues that need to be resolved, and we don't know everything, but I suppose it depends on what you mean by crisis. Anyway, for the past century or so, we have explained the universe with two wildly successful physical theories, general relativity and quantum mechanics, two things I'd like to at least think I know a thing or two about. Quantum mechanics describes how things work in the incredibly tiny world of particles and particle interactions. General relativity describes the big picture of gravity and how objects move. Both theories work extremely well in their own right, but the two are thought to conflict with one another. Though the exact nature of the conflict is controversial, scientists generally agree both theories need to be replaced with a new, more general theory. Yeah, I guess that's pretty accurate. It's more that there needs to be a way to describe to essentially give general relativistic descriptions at a quantum level, and we just don't know how to do that yet. But yeah, the idea that there would be a more fundamental and thereby more general theory out of which both quantum mechanics and general relativity fall is probably what's going to be the case. Physicists want to produce a theory of quantum gravity that replaces general relativity and quantum mechanics while capturing the extraordinary success of both. Such a theory would explain how gravity's big picture works at the miniature scale of particles. Time and quantum gravity. It turns out that producing a theory of quantum gravity is extraordinarily difficult. That it certainly is. One attempt to overcome the conflict between the two theories is string theory, something that, if anybody knows me, I'm not very amicable towards. I think string theory is almost entirely wrong. String theory replaces particles with strings vibrating in as many as 11 dimensions. However, string theory faces a further difficulty. String theories provide a range of models that describe a universe broadly like our own, and they don't really make any clear predictions that can be tested by experiments to figure out which model is the right one, and that's correct. String theory currently has, or I don't really want to say predicts, but gives 10 to the 500th possible solutions to the universe, what our universe could look like, and we don't know if our universe happens to fall into that 10 to the 500th, and we don't have any, at least current experiments or observations that we could perform that would help us figure that out. String theory is effectively unfalsifiable. But I'm wondering, let's see where they're going with the mentioning of string theory. I don't know if he's planning on going somewhere with that. In the 1980s and 90s, many physicists became dissatisfied with string theory and came up with a range of new mathematical approaches to gravity. At least somebody acknowledges that. One of the most prominent of these is loop quantum gravity, which I also am not very amicable to, which proposes that the fabric of space and time is made of a network of extremely small discrete chunks, or loops. One of the remarkable aspects of loop quantum gravity is that it appears to eliminate time entirely. I would that would need to be broken open for me to agree or disagree. I guess I'm just agnostic to that. Eliminate time entirely. Loop quantum gravity is not alone in abolishing time. A number of other approaches also seem to remove time as a fundamental aspect of reality. Okay, that yeah, and then I see emergent time. Okay, I think I know what's going on here. But let's keep reading and see where it goes. So we know we need a new physical theory to explain the universe, and that this theory might not feature time. Suppose such a theory turns out to be correct. Would it follow that time does not exist? It's complicated, and it depends on what we mean by exist. Well, for me, again, like I said, I'm taking exist here to just mean be physically real in much the same way that like a star is physically real, or that the Earth is physically real. It's concrete and objective in its ontology, I guess is one way that you could put it. Theories of physics don't include any tables, chairs, or people. Well, wait, hold on. I think that would depend on what theory of physics you're using. I would say those are included in classical mechanics. And yet we still accept that tables, chairs, and people exist. Well, of course. Why? Because we assume that such things exist at a higher level than the level described by physics, except they exist at a level that can be described by physics. We say that tables, for example, emerge from an underlying physics of particles whizzing around the universe. I mean, that is true, but that doesn't mean that, like, tables don't exist. See, yeah, that's what I figured was going on here, is that once I saw the, back up here, where was it? Right here. A number of other approaches also seem to remove time as a fundamental aspect of reality, and then I saw the emergent time. What this told me is that they're taking the emergence of time to mean that time isn't real. The fact that time isn't fundamental doesn't mean that it isn't real. Temperature is not technically a fundamental feature of reality. It's more the macroscopic. It's more a macroscopic effect, or an effect that emerges in macroscopic objects. But nobody's going to say that temperature doesn't exist. It's just there are scales of reality at which the idea becomes superfluous because of the nature of the idea. So if time were to be emergent, that wouldn't mean that time doesn't exist or that time isn't physically real. It just means it's not present at all levels of reality. That's all that would mean. But while we have a pretty good sense of how a table might be made out of fundamental particles, we have no idea how time might be made out of something more fundamental. Well, sure, but that doesn't mean that it is, and that's probably because time may be emergent. And if it's not, then it's fundamental, and thereby it isn't made out of anything. So, I mean, in either of those instances, time is still a real thing. So unless we can come up with a good account of time, a good account of how time emerges, it's not clear that we can simply assume time exists. Well, again, the fact that it's an emergent feature doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. That's just I don't understand that reasoning. Time might not exist at any level. Well, that is straightforwardly false. Time certainly exists at the classical level. It's a quantity that is measured and has to be incorporated into our equations to get accurate measurements of reality, and without which we wouldn't be capable of describing or understanding the force of gravity. So this I would say is just a straightforwardly false sentence. There is certainly a level at which time can be said to be physically real. It might not be fundamental, but I still think that any physicist is going to say that time is a physically real thing. Saying that time does not exist at any level is like saying that there are no tables at all. Yep. Well, wait, but that's just mereological nihilism. That's to state that the tables really don't exist. Somebody can believe that there are emergent features in reality, that tables are emergent from the fundamental structures and relations of molecules, which are themselves emergent from the fundamental structures and relations of atoms, which are themselves emergent from the even more fundamental structures and relations of elementary particles, which are themselves the result of structures and relations of the even more fundamental quantum fields. But I don't think that necessitates that tables don't exist. There could still be a sense in which we can say at a particular scale of reality, tables are an ontically real, or at least a physically real thing. They're just not a fundamentally real thing. They are physically real, just not at all levels of reality. They're an emergent feature. Not necessarily that the author is arguing this, but I do just want to point out that thinking that there are certain features of reality that are emergent doesn't necessarily commit one to mereological nihilism. Something like this, that saying that tables don't exist at all at any level would be like mereological nihilism. That all there is are just fundamental particles and particular arrangements that they hold, but anything above that isn't actually real. That, to me, is what mereological nihilism is, but I could be wrong on that. So trying to get by in a world without tables might be tough, but managing in a world without time seems positively disastrous. Our entire lives are built around time. Yeah, just like they are space. And that's the other thing, is that if time isn't real, what about space? Because, like, we do realize it is space-time, right? Like, I don't want... They're not one and the same, and there is a level at which they may disconnect from one another, but at least at the classical level, the level of special and general relativity, space-time is one manifold, and thereby space and time are, you could say in some sense, intertwined with each other. I don't know if I would say intrinsically intertwined, but certainly intertwined. So if time isn't real, like, what about space? Like, how do we hash this out? And if space-time isn't real, then what does anything physical exist within? That's sort of the questions that I get when I see this sentence, is that, yeah, I mean, time is, like I said, it's an actual variable in our equations. I mean, even at the quantum level, time can be a variable in your equation. So, I mean, time could be emergent. I don't think that means that it's not real. We plan for the future in light of what we know about the past. We hold people morally accountable for their past actions with an eye to reprimanding them later on. We believe ourselves to be agents, entities that can do things, in part because we can play and act. We can plan to act in a way that will bring about changes in the future. But what's the point of acting to bring about a change in the future when, in a very real sense, there is no future to act for, which, again, seems rather ridiculous. What's the point of punishing someone for a past action when there is no past? And so, hold on here. Don't want my laptop to die. There we go. But what's the point? What's the point of punishing someone for a past action when there is no past, and so apparently no such action? It's nice to know that I now have a battery warning again when I didn't before. Thanks, Apple. The discovery that time does not exist would seem to bring the entire world to a grinding halt. Haha, I see your pun. We would have no reason to get out of bed. I see your other pun. But again, I just don't think that there's anything indicating that time doesn't exist, just that it's an emergent feature rather than a fundamental feature. But emergent features can still have ontology. They can still be physically real or ontically real. They can still be concrete. I don't see why that would, I'm just failing to see how emergence somehow equates to not really having some sort of concrete ontology. Business as usual. There is a way out of the mess. While physics might eliminate time, it doesn't appear that it does, at least from what I have seen. It seems to leave causation intact, the sense in which one thing can bring about another. See, now this is weird, though, because I would say it's the other way around. Time is an actual physical variable in our equations. You can take its derivative, for Christ's sake. But there is no variable that we can say that variable is a cause. You don't have that in physical equations like you do with time. So it seems to me that this is just completely backwards. It seems that physics doesn't really say much about causation, that causation is something more than just that. I personally would argue causation is probably something intentional with an S, excuse me, which means that it's an idea that's it's a concept that's given in terms of its understanding or its meaning, rather than in terms of what you may apply that concept to, which would be the extensions of the content, or the extension of the concept rather, and then the intention would be sort of the meaning, the understanding. So yeah, that this just confuses me. I'm not going to get too much into the causation here, because I'm still planning on doing a video about that, but I'm just reading a little bit on it some more. But yeah, time is an actual physical variable in our equations. Causation isn't. So this right here just seems completely ass backwards to me, if I'm being honest. And then, like I said, this raises a number of questions about causation. Is causation actually even real? There are people, I wouldn't say I'm committed to the idea, but I am a little bit amicable to the idea that being a nominalist about causation, that causation isn't, it isn't concretely real. It may be real in the sense of being like an intuitive abstraction, but like I said, I'm not necessarily committed to that idea. Perhaps what physics is telling us, then, is that causation and not time is the basic feature of our universe. I don't agree with either, because it seems that when you get to the quantum scale, causal notions, however you choose to define them, because it seems that under pretty much any framework for understanding causal relations or causal notions or defining causal notions, it seems that under any of them, they don't really have any utility at the quantum scale. They don't really help us. They don't further our understanding of the occurrence of events at the quantum scale. That these events are just truly stochastic or properly stochastic. So even with respect to that, this sentence just, again, seems further absurd, that causation would be more fundamental to time. But I still just can't get over the fact that time is literally a variable present in physical equations from classical mechanics to quantum mechanics. Causation is not. And the fact that causation isn't something present in equations of motion or anything like that, or even any laws of physics, but seems to be something emerging out of them, is what has led many people. I know my philosopher friends are gonna beat me if I get this wrong, but I think Hume was one of the first ones that alluded to that idea, and I want to say Russell might have commented on that, but don't quote me on that. I can't remember if my reading is correct there. Perhaps what physics is telling us then is causation and not time is the basic feature of the universe. If that's right, then agency can still survive, for it is possible to reconstruct a sense of agency entirely in causal terms. Also, I really wanted to say before I finish this article off, I don't know what it would mean to... honestly, I don't think I would know what it would mean to talk about causation sans time. With respect to what I've read and what I've been reading, it seems that almost every notion of causation is going to include the notions of time, is going to include temporal notions to some extent, whether atheoretic or B-theoretic. In either case, causation is going to include temporal notions. So the idea that causation could be more fundamental to time, there's a number of reasons why I would just say that doesn't seem to be false, but almost just absurd. Anyway, let's finish this up. At least that's what Kirsty... If that's right, then agency can still survive, for it is possible to reconstruct a sense of agency entirely in causal terms. At least that's what Kirsty Miller, Jonathan Talent... excuse me. And I argue in our new book. We suggest a discovery that time does not exist may have no direct impact on our lives, even while it propels physics into a new era. So this is an interesting article. It raises some interesting thoughts, as with respect to the ontology of time and the fundamental nature of time with respect to physics. Is it emergent? Is it fundamental? And what this means for physics. But the idea that time isn't an ontically real thing, or that it's concrete and objective in its ontology and that it's physically real, I just think is obviously, false. I think that the fact that it's present in our physical equations and we experience it in our daily life. See, if it was just that we experienced time, but there was no connection to physical equations, something kind of like causality, I would be much more open to the idea that time is just more an abstraction rather than a concrete feature of reality, but the fact that it is present in our physical equations, I mean, at all, pretty much all scales, at every scale of physics we currently have, a temporal dimension is a dimension that we're working in when you're fully describing things in a four-dimensional, in what's often referred to as a relativistic sense. I mean, relativistic classical mechanics and classical field theory, relativistic quantum mechanics and quantum field theory, relativistic astrophysics and cosmology all include variables of time, and oftentimes time derivatives. If you've ever seen t dot, and I even think there's t double dot, a second derivative with respect to time, yeah, it seems that this seems to indicate that time is physically real, at least at some scale of reality. If it's not fundamental, it may be emergent, but again, I just don't see how that would entail it necessarily having no concrete ontology. And so with that, that wraps up an examination of this article. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will see you next time. And remember, per causam nos perfectum, or through reason we progress.